It's truly an honor to be here. I have to confess that I was a little bit intimidated because actually this is not my area of expertise. I am a simple cancer cell biologist, and now I have been thrown to this side of the data that I never been before, but it has been quite an educational experience to say the least, and a pleasant one, I have to confess. So I am Tania Gracia. I am a senior staff scientist at the Wellcome Institute, and for the last 3 years I have been leading a small team that uses a single cell, single nuclei, and spatial transcriptomics in order to understand the biology of different type of brain cancers and other neurodegenerative diseases. So today, in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to try to tell you the story about how we have accidentally become fair trying to use these omics technologies to build the human cell atlas of glioblastoma. So I have been extremely fortunate to always in my scientific career to be part of very collaborative and multidisciplinary environment. So for me, data sharing is common practice, is used as standard practice. I and all the people that have worked around me have, or at least I assume that, that we all understood that sharing data actually not only encourages the diversity of thinking, but it's also extremely helpful because it helps you to recognize your mistakes faster and fix them, in very creative ways. And more importantly, it also helps you to get to the answer of your scientific question faster and in a less painful matter. But I just have realized that I was very wrong. Sharing data is not a common practice, or at least it was not. It's getting better now, but it's not. It's not as common as I thought. So when British people get angry, they actually write a letter. But when scientists get angry, they write a paper, obviously. So this is the very first angry letter of a couple of bioinformaticians that work in the University of Pittsburgh. At that point, there was a boom of microarrays, and they were bioinformaticians designing tools to analyze this type of data, but they couldn't find many data. And then they asked, why is people not sharing data? They never find the answer, but they find very specific points that actually help them to make the case in terms of numbers in order to see if they can change something. So they went to 20 journals and found around 400 different papers in microarray for bioscience. And they find out that only pretty much 35% of the papers were sharing the data. And they also found that despite the fact that 80% of these papers were funded by the NIH, they are supposed to be public funded, they are obliged to share this data to the public. Actually, only 13% of them did share the data. And realized that mostly researchers, with the long senior researchers with a high reputation, or people who publish only in high impact factor papers, journals, were more likely to share the data. And then next generation sequencing happened. So imagine if they weren't sharing microarray data, it was even more difficult to make them to share next generation sequencing. But then there was a group of concerned citizens or concerned scientists, and they were very clever because they put this workshop in the Netherlands where they put key stakeholders from the public and private sectors, and they discuss intensively during 4 days, why you should share your data, how you should share it, in which formats, for how long can you use it, who can pass it along, et cetera, et cetera. All these little things that they thought that was stopping the people to share the data. And then, of course, as scientists, they write a paper about it, and that's how the FAIR principles were born. The keynote speaker this morning, I'm not going to go into detail, but he explained very well, what are these principles and why it is important to practice it. In any case, these concerned citizens, they didn't stop there. They actually crashed the G20 summit in 2016 in China, and they actually managed to have, these very important, the most important and powerful world leaders to sign a document where they say that they will be implementing policies and give money, provide resources, not only for the usual things, the usual fights, the mobility of the human resources that nowadays that's a bit questionable, but including more women, in science, giving more opportunities. But a more important part is that they were committed to public funding, write strict policies about sharing data and share it under the FAIR principles. So they went on to create this international office that it is funded, actually still going on, is funded by the governments of France, Germany, and the Netherlands. But there is a group of people actually spreading the word, training people, informing the people what is the concept of FAIR, or the FAIR principles, how to implement it in their scientific environment, and benefits that they bring. But even though they were spreading the word, the usual thing, humans, we have our own interpretation for our own benefit. So there was a lot of unhappy people in the academic community that some of them were taking more advantage than the other. What do you do? Well, you get together, and in Paris, it was a group of the most important, the 9 highest associations of university that cover most of the universities in the world, and they produced a document called the Sorbonne Declaration of Research Data Rights, but they forced the government actually they only give money to people, signing contracts where they say, this is public money, you should share your data as soon as possible. And I came across this very beautiful paper. It was in 2022, but he's a senior researcher, Matthias Schäfer. He's a researcher in material sciences. And then he was very clear. He says, the ridiculous amount of data that humanity, that we are producing, that the scientists are producing now, is the biggest gold mine of knowledge. But this mine of knowledge is useless if the data that you produce here is not shared, and if it's not shared under the FAIR principles. And it says that the FAIR principles actually should be included as the last step of the scientific method, because there is no other way. The other thing that he emphasized is that we have to recognize that it's only using machine learning and AI the only way that we can actually maximize the mining of these knowledge resources. I want to point out that I came across this paper that it was from last year, that NASA, it's written by NASA, is celebrating 30 years of access to NASA space life science data. This title actually is quite misleading, because when I read the paper, yes, they have been collecting data for 30 years and organized data for 30 years. 10 years ago, they started with the omics. And then only until 2021, they actually linked this space and life science data. And for that, they have to make it fair. In order to do that, they have to make it fair. So yes, they have been collecting data for 30 years, but they only have been sharing it properly since 2021, not from 30 years ago. Just a technicality, but I want to make the point how people, manipulate these things. Many papers saying why you should do FAIR, how you should do FAIR, but none of them, for us scientists, tell us what is the cost of that. This is an extracurricular activity, as I will say it. It's an extra effort. But it is difficult to calculate, but there is only one document that it says, it depends on the scope of your project. But in general, the average is that the cost of data management plan, it will be around 5% of the total research budget. This is extremely important, because then when you write a grant, you are conscious of that, you can include it there, you cannot ignore it anymore. I don't think that I have to convince you why you should adopt FAIR principles. And I sure don't have to explain why it has to be fair not only for humans, but for machines. So this is the initial logo of it's very clear that the principles is that you have to make your data, organize your data in a way that is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. But one thing that we cannot ignore, like in the paper from 2022, is that we cannot do this without machine learning or AI. So one play of the letter is, I think maybe the FAIR principle have to evolve, and then instead of being findable, accessible, interoperable, or reusable, it should be findable and AI ready. I think it's only fair with the machines. So in terms of the challenges, the keynote speaker this morning was talking very much about the most of the technical challenge. But as Sheffer mentioned it in the Nature paper, because the FAIR principles made it now to Nature, so it's supposed to reach more a bigger audience. I think the main challenge still is the people. And then it is sad that you still have to convince people to apply these principles. Because even though if you have the resources, if you have this extra 5%, some people can say that I'd rather use that 5% to a small project or something like that. They're not giving importance to the data management. But then imagine if it's very difficult to get the scientists to share the data. Imagine if you dare to ask, where about the metadata? Have you organized the metadata? Can you share that with us? And again, spend some time doing the ontology. So it's not an easy task, but I think it's because it's in the interest of the whole scientific community. I think individual responsibilities are extremely important here. I mean, the rest, infrastructure, it's becoming expensive, obviously, big volumes of data. And then data processing and analysis, well, definitely we need to educate more people. We need to increase the skills, the technical skills on the scientists to be able to develop, new ontology-derived workflows and all that is needed to implement the fairness. I think that sometimes you don't realize how much something is going to affect you until you put a very practical example. So I came across this study in the 2018, the European Commission. They requested a study on how much it will cost of not having fair research data to the economy of Europe. And they did that because they were trying to implement this EFRA project, which is the very first project in which they are going to use only exclusively AI to make decisions about food risk prevention. So they were going to use only AI data, analyze data to make decisions about what you should be eating, what kind of poultry, what kind of germs or organisms are more likely to cause a pandemic, and all this very critical information. And they find out that it will cost around 10 billion per year, of not having fair research data. That's how it will cost the economy of Europe. But for me, the most terrifying findings of this study is that there are unquantified elements. The things that they can quantify are like, the time that you spend looking for the data, the cost of the storage, the licenses, when you have to retract, et cetera, et cetera. But the unquantified elements, could account for even more, almost 17 billion euros. So in total, it will be like 27 billions that it will cost the economy not to have fair data. For me, the scary part is this part ahead, the data quality. You cannot quantify that. So that's terrifying when you are making this type of decisions. That is not only bad. It's not all bad. There are extremely very good examples that the scientific community have benefited from. The biggest or the largest dataverse repository is Harvard Dataverse. It has around 100,000 data sets, and it's open access, and it's very easy to get to. And it covers not only life science, but material science, social science, et cetera, et cetera. OpenFacts is another one that is extremely good because it was the first one and still going strong that was related to drug discovery. And of course, UniProt, which is the poster child of fairness, mostly because they are very, very particular about metadata. They don't put anything there that it doesn't have, that is not covered by a very curated or very complete metadata. So of course, pharmaceutical companies, they realize, how benefit it is to have fair processes. Even the UK government is actually implementing fairness. And the most important part that I think I'm very jealous of this. In the Netherlands, most of the universities have become fair. So there are around 4 or 5 universities that have been certified, fair certified. I don't know how that happens. I will need to educate myself more on that. But it will be really nice if this can be spread. And of course, Elixir and the EBI, that we depend heavily as scientists on them. Anyway, I went to the Festival of Genomics last month in London, and I was just comparing the fact that the benefits that they say. He has saved. This is a guy who has been working the last 3 years doing just fair processes in the omics data that they manage, and he has saved the company more than €1 million per year. And I actually compared, this is a graph that I actually have for my presentation in the lab as well. I didn't save much money, but save resources, and then pointed out the same advantages, the translational impact and the fair, and the fact that the data is fair from the start. Okay, I'm going to wrap up here. So as Gordon mentioned this morning, we were blessed with a significant amount of resources from the LEAP to build the human atlas of glioblastoma. We use approximately 12 different modalities and the ridiculous amount of data that we generated. But we're hoping that with that, in the way that we process the high quality and the way we organize and analyze the data, we're giving hope to patients with glioblastoma, which is the most the worst type of brain cancer that there is, and there is no hope for these patients. So we thought that with this we will change the outcome of these patients at some point. This is just a picture of the different type of outputs that we get from the modalities, 11 of them, so it might be as well the same type. This is how we build our fair glioblastoma space. It is, we were 2 institutes, the Wyss and the Sanger, and then this is the structure of the boxology, or the way we organize the data in order to put it in a pipeline. It's better that I show you this. We did a lot of data curation. We put only high quality. We work on the ontologies together. I have many stories about that. We put the data shapes, we translate all that to RDF, and the most important part was the data linking, because we have identified gene regulatory networks, these biomarkers, these specific targets. The only thing that we were missing was, to match that with small molecules. And then I thought, the easiest way will be to go to the open targets, because we had the office just next door. But guess what? The open targets are not as open as we thought they were. So thank you to our reviewer number 2, we managed actually to say, well, there are other sources that are already established. And then this smart move have opened the doors for us to expand our linking. So we're extremely grateful with the smart reviewer number 2 for this. So it amplified the amount of queries that we could do. This is how it looked for the machine. And this is one of the first query that we did. And of course, again, it's not my cup of tea. I don't have skills for that. Andra has been extremely helpful, with the architecture, the data architecture, and the querying and all this. So we managed to do queries internally with the collaborators and outside of this world. This is just one of them, a general schema about how it will look. Our platform is still a work in progress. But it's there. And the best part is that in all these meetings, when I have been giving this talk about how we have become fairness, they have we have academics coming to us, can you please help us? Even though they use different modalities, they use spatial transcriptomics, but nanostream and digital spatial profilers that, we don't use, but we're helping them. We have collaborations with ARI, and because we were running their samples, processing their samples, they have no choice but become fair, because otherwise their samples won't get into our workflow. So it's a way of spreading. And since I mentioned that comment of that 5%, you should ask for the 5% just for data management. This PI from King's College actually have getting twice what she has asked for. So she has been extremely grateful for that. Even Sanger is changing their policies. In the past, you should publish as soon as possible, share as soon as possible the data, but now they are giving us a little bit of more time as long as you make the data fair. So I think, these are significant changes that I'm happy. Of course, I don't do this by myself. So it was the main technician helping me to build this fair data set. Thank you. Thank you for listening.